Hello, in this video we're going to take a look at import statements, and we're also going to take a look at the random module in depth so we can look at generating random numbers in our program. Alright, to start off we're going to learn a new keyword in the Python programming language today, and that keyword is import. What this allows us to do primarily is include code other people have written in our program so that we don't have to write it ourselves. This is a really powerful feature of any programming language. And in particular, when it comes to Python, there's a wealth of free libraries available to do many different things. And along with Python's simplicity, this is a major reason why Python is so popular, especially in the scientific community. So I just want to show you a quick example that I made in just a couple of minutes that does something fairly complicated. Just a silly little example here. It's going to make the Indian Creek logo bounce around the screen. Okay, that's not too exciting, but as you can already see from what we've done, even fairly simple things require a lot of code. And I was able to write this program here in about 20 lines of code. And if you see at the top here, there's some import statements. The main one doing the work here is this one called Pygame. We won't really get to that in this class, but if you go on in the future and want to make some sort of graphical game or something, this is definitely a really fantastic resource that allows you to do a lot of fairly complicated things, especially when it comes to animation and graphics, without much effort on your part, because that's all been done for you by somebody else. That's really a major part of the art of programming, is just finding resources where somebody's already solved a problem for you, so you're not reinventing the wheel. All right, so let's take a look at a particular import statement, random. As you might imagine, this library, this part of the Python standard library, this module called random, is used to generate random numbers, among other things. So let's take a look at the documentation for the random module and get an idea of what we can do. So what I'm going to do is just Google Python 3 documentation, and here's what I want at the top here. You could also go to docs.python.org, but I usually just Google stuff so I don't have to remember things like that. And if we click on this and then head to library reference right here, this is going to give us a list of everything that's included when we install Python. Segments of code that have already been written for us that we can use and leverage in our programs and not have to reinvent the wheel. So let's take a look and see if we can find random in here. So everything in here is, has to do with different things you can import in your code or use. Some of it's already included by default, but many of these things you'll have to import, like statistics and other things. But today we're going to take a look at random, and later we'll also look at the math module. So I'm going to go ahead and click on random. So this is for generating random numbers. Alright, fantastic. Now if we scroll down, here's all the different things we can do. This is kind of overwhelming, so we're not going to worry about a lot of it. A lot of these things are fairly complicated. We're just going to worry about two things we can do with the random module today. Okay, we're going to look at this here, which is the randint. Alright, and that's for generating a random integer between a and b, and we'll look at that in a second. And we're also going to look at this guy here, which is random.uniform. So this is for generating a random floating point number, so a number with a decimal point. Alright, so remember, to get here, I just went ahead and Googled Python 3 documentation, clicked on the first result, went to the library reference, and found what I wanted to use. I probably could have also just Googled Python 3 random, and I would have been able to get to the same place here. Okay? Alright, let's take a look in our code here. So I can also mess around with this in the shell. We'll make a couple example programs in a moment, but for now I'm just going to play around in the shell so that I can do this more quickly. I'm going to import random. So that's the first thing that needs to happen. So import statements are the very first thing in your file. It's a good practice for them to be the very first lines. You can have comments above them, because remember, comments don't do anything. It's just a note to you, the programmer, okay? But besides that, the order of things you should have in your program is import statements, then any function definitions down here, which we'll talk about in a few lessons, and then the rest of your code. So import statements, first thing you should have in your file, okay? But anyway, we're going to go ahead and play around with this in the shell. So remember the two that I mentioned are random.randint. And let's just take an example. I'm going to pick some numbers. I'll pick 2 and 12. Okay. So what this is going to do is it's going to give me back a random value between 2 and 12 inclusive. So inclusive means that it includes the endpoints. So you can imagine I'm saying, like, I'm thinking of a number between 0 and 5, but 0 and 5 aren't possible options, so only 1, 2, 3, and 4 are. But in this case, both of these values are possible options. So this could give me 2 or 12 or anything in between that's a whole number, okay? And I'm also going to go ahead and assign that to the variable a. So I go ahead and execute that line and then check what the value stored in a is. Right now it's 4. If I just copy this and run it again, there's a chance I'll get 4 again, but most likely I'll get a different number. So I'll go ahead and check, and I got 9 this time. So if I assign the value of a variable to random.randint and then 2 numbers in here, it'll give me a random number between these 2 numbers. So in this case, 2 and 12. But remember, you could put any numbers you want here and get a different random value. And then it will return that value and whatever it is and store it in the variable a. And this is really nice because if we wanted to write our own way of generating random numbers, of course we could, it's possible, and we could even go and look at the source code for how this works, but it's actually a fairly complicated algorithm to generate random numbers, and that's not really what we're concerned with learning about. So with literally just one line of code here where we import random, we can use all of that code that was already written for us and generate random numbers and do other interesting things. All right, so let's just quickly look at another randint just so we see clearly that you can, and here's the description, return random integer in the range a to b including both endpoints, okay? So I could generate a different random number, I'd say from -3 up to 100, okay? And if I check what the value of b is, 43 in this case. All right, so that's not too complicated, I hope. Pretty simple to understand. Now let's just take a look at one other random function, and that was the uniform function. So it's very, very similar, but now we can get numbers with decimal points in them. So most of the time you're going to want to generate random integers, but just in case something comes up and you want to generate a random temperature or a random weight or a random building height or character height or something like this, where it's generally not just a whole number, it could be something with a decimal point, then we're going to go ahead and use this. So I'll make another variable called c, and I'm going to say random.uniform. So this gives me a random number in the range. Don't worry about this part. This is a little pedantic, but that's not too important. But it generates a random number, so not a random integer, just any number now in the range a to b, okay? So for instance, I could go maybe 4.2 up to 20.6, for instance. And then if I go ahead and check what the value stored in C is now, I get this, which is some completely random number with lots of decimal points. And in general, it will have many decimal points like this. We'll talk about how to round and stuff probably later on in this class. But for now, that's pretty simple too, right? And I could make another variable called d, and I could do the same thing. Random.uniform, and I could give it different values. I could say from 0 to 1, for instance. And now if I check what's in D, I'm going to get a random number between 0 and 1. So something like 0.52 or blah, 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 anything like that. So if I check, in this case, I got 0.87786, and so on. And if I copied this line and just did it again and updated the value of D, basically guaranteed, because it's pretty unlikely that I'd get exactly this number again, right? So I'm basically guaranteed that now I'm going to get a different number, which surprisingly, in this case, it just happened to be pretty close. But if I do it one more time, it's most likely not going to be that close again. So, but these are definitely different numbers, right? They are the same in the first 2 decimal places and then different after that. All right, so hopefully that's not too complicated. So we can use these 2 functions, random.randint and you supply two numbers separated by a comma. The first number is like the lower bound, the second number is like the upper bound. So I want a number in this case that I'm highlighting here between -3 and 100, and I'll get some random value. I got 43 in that case. And then the other one we talked about is random.uniform. So that's for generating a number that has a decimal place called a floating point number. And it's the same deal. I can put whatever numbers I want as the lower end and the upper end, and I'll get some random number. So in this example I'm highlighting, I wanted a number between 4.2 and 20.6. And when I ran it, I ended up getting 4.6 about. Okay? So let's go ahead and look at why we want to do this in the first place, like why this might be useful. So remember, the first thing we need if we're going to use the random module is an import statement that says import random. And I'm going to go ahead and look at a couple examples. So first I'm just going to look at a dice roll. So I'll go ahead and save that as dice roll example, and I'm going to save my file, of course. As always, I'm just going to save it in my Python files folder. I'm going to call it random examples.py. Okay, and let's go. So dice roll example, I want a number, so I'm going to call it, my variable I'm going to call roll. Then I'm going to get a random, and what do I want? Do I want an integer for the value of a dice roll, or do I want a floating point value? Dice just tend to have whole numbers on them, right? So that's what I'm going to use. I'm going to random.randint, and go ahead and think about, I'm going to roll a six-sided dice, or a six-sided die, sorry. So the values I'm going to get are between 1 and 6, okay? And then I can go ahead and print, you rolled a, and then I'll just say whatever the value of roll is. So I'm using the fancier version of print here, where I just put a comma instead of having to do other things. So convert this to a string and stuff. I can just put a comma in the print statement, and let's run it. I'll hit F5 to run. Pay attention to the console down here. All right, you rolled a 6. And if I ran this again, I'll hit F5 again, I'll roll a different number. And if I keep running this program, I'll get, different numbers. Sometimes I'll get the same one, but it's just random, like rolling a real dice, or real die, okay? So here's the results down here, right? All right, that's pretty simple. We could think of lots of reasons. Maybe we want to make a computer game that plays Yahtzee or something, okay? Or Risk, because that usually is just a bunch of dice rolling in the end anyway, right? So let's look at another program. I'm going to make say a coin flip example. Now this one's a little less straightforward because coins don't have a number on them; they have heads or tails. So I have to make a choice about a number representing something else. So for instance, I'm going to make the choice that 0 means heads and 1 means tails. So I'm going to make a variable. I'm just going to call it flip. I'm going to set that equal to random.randint again, from 0 to 1. Okay, so now the variable flip will have a random number, either 0 or 1, stored in it, and I'll have to use an if statement to translate this meaning. All right, so I'm going to say if flip equals 0, print you flipped, or I'll just say maybe a little less weird, coin landed on, and I said 0 means heads, so if flip is 0, I'll say the coin landed on heads. Otherwise, if it's not 0, it has to be 1. I'll print coin landed on tails. And remember, instead of else, I could say elif flip equals 1 here. But since I know that flip is either going to be 0 or 1, I really don't have to use my brain to think about that. I can just say if it's 0, it landed on heads. Otherwise, if it wasn't 0, it had to be 1, so it landed on tails. And let's go ahead, I'll hit F5 and run this program. I want to save it, so if I run it that time, it landed on tails, and if I keep running it, it'll, just like a real coin, randomly go back and forth between heads and tails. And if I run it many, many times and keep track of how many times it's on heads and how many times it's on tails, if we've got a good random number generator, which we do, then we'll get about 50-50. So about half the time this will say heads down here, but half the time it will say tails. Okay. All right, let's look at another example like this where we have to translate a random value into something different that's not just a number. So how about rock, paper, scissors example? Okay, so again, when you play rock, paper, scissors, you don't hold up a number, you hold up a symbol, or you say rock or paper or scissors. So this is a game I hope you're familiar with. If you're not familiar, it's not that important. The idea here is that we're going to assign numbers to represent something else so that we can use our random numbers to do something interesting in our program. So imagine we're writing a rock, paper, scissors game and we want to make the computer play against the human. So we're going to make the computer pick a random move. So again, I'm going to go ahead and give a meaning to different numbers. So I'm going to say 0 means rock, maybe, 1 means paper, and 2 means scissors. Now I don't have to put this comment here. This is just a way for me to keep track of it. Remember, these comments don't actually do anything. It's just a way for me to show you what I'm doing and for me to keep track of it, because if I look at this program a year down the line, I might not remember that, oh yeah, when I get a 0, I mean rock by that, so that my computer can play. So I'll just make a variable called comp move for like maybe the computer's move in a game of rock, paper, scissors. This might just be like a small section of the code in the larger game you're writing. And I'm going to set that equal to random.randint again. And in this case, I want a number from 0 up to 2. Because I want my value to be either 0, 1, or 2 for rock, paper, or scissors. Alright, and then we'll use if statements again. So if comp move equals 0, I'll go ahead and print out the computer played rock. Okay, and then else if comp move is 1, I'll print out that the computer played scissors. The computer played scissors. Alright, and then else, if it wasn't 0 or 1, it must have been 2, because that's the values that I'm allowing to randomly generate. Then the computer must have played rock. Oh, sorry. I got confused. So this is why we need the comment. So 1, remember, was paper, not scissors. And 2 is scissors. We'll spell it with a Z, why not? Be a little whimsical. So if the 0 means rock, so if the random computer move I generate is 0, then I'll say the computer played rock. If the random computer move I generate here is 1, then I'll say the computer played paper. Otherwise, it must have been 2, so I'll say the computer played scissors. Now, in reality, you might do something more complicated. You might do, inside of here, you might do like comparisons against whatever move the player picked. So maybe you'll have the player enter 0, 1, or 2 as well, and you'll say, well, if the player picked 0, which means rock, and the computer picked 1, which means paper, then the computer wins the game, or something like that. And maybe you'll do that at a later time, but for now, we're just learning about the random number part of this, so we're not too worried about that. Just giving you the idea. So I'm going to run this program, and I'll get something. In that case, the computer played paper, but if I run it again, I'll probably get something different. The computer played rock, and same deal. I can just keep running this, and I'll get just different random answers, okay, down here in the Python shell. All right, fantastic. So you can think of lots of other examples. Those were just a few silly ones that you're probably familiar with. I'm going to go ahead and do one more example where I use the random uniform. So I'm going to say random weather example. So maybe you're writing a little text-based game where you tell the user some scenario they're in at the beginning of the game, and it's random every time. So maybe it's snowing outside, maybe it's just chilly, maybe it's a nice day out, or maybe it's really hot, okay? So I'm going to generate a temperature. I'm going to say that's random.uniform between 0 and 100. And I'm going to put a comment here. So generate a random temperature between 0 and 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. And that'll, because temperatures are generally not just a whole number, right? You don't just go from 50 degrees to 51 degrees. It's possible to be at 50.5 degrees or 51.5 degrees, right? So I'll just use if statements again. And in reality, again, the program where I'm using this might be more complex because I might be making, my situation that I was thinking of is I'm making a game and there's different scenarios that the player has to respond to. So maybe, for instance, if the temperature is less than 32, I'll say it's snowing outside. Okay. And then I could say else if the temperature is less than, let's say, it will say 60. I'll just say it's chilly out. And I can do another else if the temperature is less than, let's say, 80. I'll just say it's a nice day outside. Remember, this statement would mean the temperatures between that I randomly generated is between 60 and 80. If I get to this, it's a nice day outside, because the ones above it had to be false. That's just some review of how the if-else block works. So if this is false, if the temp is not less than 32, then I'll go ahead and skip to the next one and I'll check if that's true instead. So if the temp is less than 60, if that's also not true, I'll skip to the next one. If that's true, then I'll say it's a nice day outside. If it's not true, if there's something else, in this case I'm going to add one last else. So if the temperature wasn't less than 80, then it must have been between 80 and 100, and I'll say it's scorching outside. Here. Okay, and let's just go with 3 exclamation points, not 4. That's too dangerous. All right, let's take a look and run this program. I'll go ahead and save it. It's a nice day outside. Maybe that's how our game starts, but maybe if we play it again, it's snowing outside, so now we have different obstacles or challenges to face in the game, maybe. Of course, all we're doing here is printing out a random value, but you could do something more interesting with this in a larger program. All right, so that's been an introduction to the importance of import statements, which allow you to use code that other people have written for you, so you don't have to do something yourself when it's already been achieved. And also, in particular, how to use the random module from the Python standard library that comes with Python. And of course, there's other stuff you could download, like the Pygame I showed you that doesn't come with Python, but you could download that yourself and use it to achieve the similar effect, where you can use complicated things that you didn't have to write the code for to achieve something interesting. All right, thanks for watching the video. I'll catch you in the next one.